Welcome to our virtual Q&A for Rebuilding Paradise with producer Xan Parker and key subject of the film, Michelle John and Woody Culleton. Our moderator is Matt Carey from Deadline. My name is Gwen Diglis. I'm the Deputy Director for the American Cinematheque. And I'd like to invite you to check our website, americancinematheque.com, where you can find information about our upcoming programs and how you can support the American Cinematheque by becoming a member. Enjoy.
Hi, welcome, and thanks for joining us today. I'd like to welcome back Xan Parker, the producer, and our two subjects. Woody Culleton, who's the former mayor of Paradise, and of course, Michelle John, who was the superintendent of schools when the fire broke out. And for Woody and Michelle, I'd love to ask you first, and I hope it's not re-traumatizing, but if you could tell us where you were on November 8th, 2018, when the fire broke out and how you escaped.
Right. I actually was in San Diego that morning at a national superintendent's conference, and I was back up in Paradise before 11 a.m. I will spare you all the details of how I got there. It wasn't easy. It was pure black, and of course I could not get up the hill, and I remember just standing at the fairgrounds waiting for buses, waiting for anyone. I had lost contact with my husband, with everybody. So although I did not drive through the fire, I was waiting at the bottom of the hill, and so far very few people had shown up by 11 a.m.
What do you have about you?
Well, I worked at the bottom of the hill in a little town called Durham, about I don't know, a few miles, 10 miles away. And I went to work at 6:30 in the morning. So when I saw the smoke, and I had a scanner, and I heard that there was 13 minutes after 7, there was fire in the town of Paradise, spot fires behind the hospital and stuff. So I drove up to meet my wife, and we tried to rescue our cats and weren't able to. And the time I got up here at about 7:30, there was fire in the neighbor's yard, and we took two cars. We got split up. I picked up my daughter in the middle of town, and my wife and I were split up, and it took us almost 5 hours to get out of town. We were just trapped in traffic with flames on both sides of us, and it was a little bit frightening.
Yeah, it's an incredible scene that we see in the first 10 minutes of the film, Xan. It kind of reminded me of Saving Private Ryan, that it's absolutely riveting for the audience that wasn't present for it. But when did you become part of the film and get to work on the documentary?
Who, me?
No, for Xan.
Oh, for Xan? Oh, her?
It's Xan. It's short for Alexandra. It's easier than you think it is. I was asked to join the project after they had I think, about several days of shooting in the end of 2018, which was when the fire took place in November of 2018. And it was really tricky because, Ron had a really great idea to tell the story of a town responding to, and we hoped from the beginning, rebuilding and recovering from a really incredible tragedy. And I would say man-made, I would say natural disaster, but really was unfortunately almost also very man-made. And it was daunting because it was coming in, getting to know a whole community who is going through incredible trauma, and, asking for access to their lives at a really, really hard time for them. And I think we had to really strike a balance. We didn't want to exploit anybody. We wanted to show everybody's story with the greatest respect, which, Ron really set the tone for that. And I felt very blessed to spend, I think, 90 days in the field, getting to know these two folks and many other incredible people. And it was really about, we just, built the plane as we were flying it and figured it out along with all the Paradisians.
Woody, I'll ask you first, but can you describe what it smelled like, what the town looked like in the immediate aftermath of the fire? We see some extraordinary footage of that, but it's another thing to be right in the middle of it.
Well, it was The aftermath, I mean, the day of being in the fire was, you see that in the first 9 minutes of the film, and that really gives you a good sense of it. Afterwards, it was just, most people in town weren't allowed into town for a number of weeks. The media was here, the film crew was here, first responders and the coroners. And I was fortunate to be able to get into town on the second day after the fire with the local newspaper editor. And it was horrific. I mean, it was a war zone. It was mass destruction. It was horrific. And there was burned out cars on the roads and telephone poles in the roads, and the coroners, they were doing body recovery. It was not pleasant,
Michelle, and you had to spring into action, of course, as a superintendent of schools. So you're balancing this trauma that you have gone through and watching your town annihilated, but you've also got to think about the kids. How difficult was that to balance those two things?
Yeah, it was very difficult. Like Woody said, I also got up there on November 9th with the fire chief. He took me up there with the town manager to look at the damage. And it's not a campfire smell. It's hard to explain, but I'll tell you, I've smelled it once since then. And the PTSD that you don't even realize you have just hits you flat in the face. We immediately sprang into our action plan of, disaster plan, and started our tree searching on where people were. You don't have communication. And that's one thing that when I've talked to schools since then, I have to tell them, make a plan as if you have no communication, because you don't sometimes. And so, you just go into your triage plan of, you find this group, you find this group, you find this group. And it took about 3 weeks to find all staff, let alone students. We had staff who had been caught in burning schools, who had texted their husbands goodbye notes that we didn't hear again from for 4 days. And we had assumed that they had perished in the fire. It was extremely traumatic. And then it took about close to a month before we found people. And we still to this day haven't found everybody. People just left, they fled. And so you still haven't found everybody. So that was traumatic, but I had a great team surrounding me, and we worked morning, noon, and night. We didn't stop until we found people.
Xan, I know Ron has spoken about knowing the community of Paradise and having a connection to it and having been there well before the fire. At what point did you decide that you really wanted the focus to be about rebuilding as opposed to a documentary simply about the fire itself?
Oh, that was Ron's first instinct. I mean, his absolute first instinct. It was actually his longtime assistant, Louisa Vellis, who's a lovely human being who was with Imagine and I think she's still with Imagine for many decades. And she knew that Ron was, looking to do more documentary work. And because he had this personal familial connection to the area of California, when she read an article about it, she said, they talked about the fire, and then she said, wouldn't it be incredible to follow the community rebuilding? And of course, a filmmaker does gravitate towards a town named Paradise, and to think about this idea of rebuilding Paradise. And it's an important phrase to consider, because our Earth is sort of a paradise, and what we're all embarking on now is responding to climate change and to the way that we've managed the land. And hopefully we will all rebuild Paradise. So I think it had this larger meaning.
Well, Michelle, we see, of course, a lot of residents struggling with whether they could return, whether it was even possible. Some wanted to get their kids into other schools right away. And there were all these obstacles to rebuilding. Did either of you have doubts or hesitation about the idea of returning to Paradise to rebuild your lives and help rebuild the town?
Well, Woody has returned. I I did not return, but mine was because of the personal tragedy. I did stay, and we were planning on staying, but then I chose to leave. I wasn't planning on retiring or leaving. Yes, we do plan. It's not if the town rebuilds for all of us, it's when. And we know it's going to be different. We had 5,500 kids in our school district before the fire, and we have 1,400 now. So you can see what's happened. And we're not rebuilding every single school site, but we're upgrading. I still work with the district. We're upgrading what we have. And we really want people to come back and see the beauty of Paradise, as it will be a changed community. It will never be the same, but it will rebuild.
What about you? Did you ever think, it looked like you were pretty committed right away to?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no. Well, my wife and I are kind of pretty much retired, and we live on Social Security, which is not a lot of money, but we had an older house that my mortgage payment, this will anger a few people watching, my mortgage payment with property taxes and insurance included was $550 a month. I couldn't rent an apartment for that. So there was no.
Not in New York.
Oh, wow.
Not anywhere, not in Paradise now.
Not in Reno.
Yeah, there was, I mean, the only place I would want to live other than here would have been on the coast. And with what I had good insurance, but with the insurance payout I was going to get, I couldn't buy anything on the coast. So it was never really a choice. I mean, I wasn't a native Paradisian. I came here from the San Francisco Bay Area in the about 40 years ago, and I fell in love with it. And this has been a community of rebirth for me. So everything good that's ever happened in my life has happened here. And so, well, and in New Orleans, but it just, there was never a doubt. So, and I knew the game. I'd been on the city council for 12 years. I'd been a builder back in the mid 80s. So I knew what it took, and in the early days, nobody knew, because FEMA was telling us it was going to take them who knew how long, a year or more, to get everything cleaned up. The water was not going to be restored to be drinkable for 2 to 3 to 5 years, if ever. I mean, there were so many unknowns, but we were committed. We were coming back. And so I was able to get a permit right away and build a home right away.
Mm-hmm. We've got a viewer question I'd like to get to. I think it's really for Woody and Michelle, but how did the fire force you to reevaluate certain aspects of your lives? Either of you.
One of the things you do now, you don't wait to use the good china. You use what you have. You don't put things away, and you enjoy them while you can. You look at pictures more. You go through pictures more, anything you have left. And it made me evaluate, plus also the tragedy, the importance of family, and the importance that, as much as I loved my career and loved my job, that's exactly what it was when push came to shove, and I needed to be with family and be with support. And it really does make you gasp and reevaluate everything you've ever done.
What do you have?
It truly makes you appreciate how fragile life is, and how, I mean, like Michelle talked about, when there's, what people don't understand is, in a tragedy like that, there's no communication. You don't know where your loved ones are. You don't know if they're dead or alive, and so to be alive, and what's really tough now in the aftermath, we're almost 3 years away from it. Everybody that lived through that is different today. Mm. We all have PTSD. I don't sleep anymore. 4 hours a night. I just don't sleep. I don't want, there's not a lot of life left, and I don't want to miss any of it, and you use a good china. We got a little bit of money from the lawsuit, and my wife says, oh, we're going to pay off the mortgage. We're going to put it away. We're going to save. No, we're going to spend it. We're going to travel. We're going to do things, because we're here today, but we don't know if we'll be here tomorrow, and there's I have so many friends that are still here that how that fire has changed us. You know, some of us are angry. Some of us are petrified. When the wind blows, people, it triggers their PTSD. When there's a fire nearby, smoke in the air, somebody's yard burning, it triggers their PTSD. It's just, but it's not all bad. It's just different now. It's just different.
Mhm. And then Woody mentioned the lawsuit. Of course, this is involving PG&E, which, as I understand it, took responsibility for the fire or for a certain amount of its role in the destruction of the town. But what can you tell us about PG&E's role in it, and whether, to the satisfaction of most people, they really stood up and took responsibility?
You know,
Well, they did take responsibility. They did.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're guilty to killing 85 people.
Yeah, I mean, how can you take responsibility for not taking care of your equipment? They can't. They cannot make it right. Even with all the money they're going to give, they killed people, and not our friends that work for PG&E in Paradise, nothing like that. But not taking care of their equipment, they killed people, and they killed our town the way it was.
Yeah. And Xan, for you, why was it important to get into that? I mean, that's part of the why of the film, why this happened. It's not the only reason it happened, but.
well, you know, we had so many different ways of putting it into the film, and we had so many different reasons for putting it into the film. And the thing about a verite documentary is that you kind of go along with the flow and all the film subjects that you're following, and you write it together. PG&E didn't help us write it, but we, you know, PG&E, if you look at that large publicly held company, you know, which has a lot of stakeholders, all of which are there for the dollar, and you look at the kind of responsibility they took, if you want to talk about them taking responsibility, and you compare it to the responsibility that Paradisians took for their neighbors, I don't know, it tells a real American story, like human beings in a town that loves living where they live, that's created a really great community, that's always had each other's backs no matter their differences. And then you got a big corporation, you know, that like begrudgingly admitted they killed 85 people and are like barely paying out a few dollars.
Mm. We have another viewer question. Woody, I'll direct this to you because you're living in Paradise now, but what is the status of the water quality?
Great. It was always great. The water was never bad. You know, what happened was
There was benzene.
I used to
Woody
have,
drank it the whole time.
no,
Woody.
the water, we have a really great water supply, and we have a good water treatment plant, none of which were damaged by the fire. What happened was the fire was so hot, it was in excess of 2,500 degrees. It melted pipes underground, and a lot of supply pipes from the street where the water came from to the houses were done with PVC, with plastic, and it melted. And then when it melts, and then what happened was when the power was shut off and everything didn't work, the pump stations didn't work. So the pressure in the water lines was gone. And so the fumes from the melted plastic lines got up into the water lines, and it contaminated some of the water lines. It never contaminated the water source. And once those lines were replaced, everything was good. So I've been drinking it for years, and there's nothing wrong with it.
You've retained your sense of humor, which I think is probably a valuable quality as you were going through all of this.
Life is too short to get too serious about anything anymore.
We have another viewer question, wondering, how can the rest of the world help Paradise heal and rebuild on a smaller or large scale?
Get rid of a lot of the regulations that hamstring common sense solutions to environmental problems. Environmental groups sometimes create more obstacles, and all of the little legal teams that want to, I mean, right now, the Native Americans in this part of the world, and probably in most of America, the original settlers, every year they would do controlled burns, and it's the way they manage their villages and stuff. We have outlawed that. We've outlawed because of snail darters or spotted owls, logging industry, people that did responsible things in our forests. So everything's become overgrown. And like right now, they're trying to bring that back. They realize, gee, we need to do this. But it takes so long to get environmental clearances from all the different regulatory bodies, and then all the lawsuits of those environmental groups that don't want you to do any of that, that hamstring it. I mean, we had a big fire a year ago over the North Complex that was scheduled to have controlled burns done to manage the dead, the fuel loads that were there. And it was held up by these lawsuits for over 2.5 years. And then there was an incident and it caught fire. So that's what the rest of the world can do is, use some common sense. I mean, trust science. And if something that really is going to protect you in the long run, don't try to shut it down because, trying to protect something, I don't know. There's real issues.
Well,
that's where
politics always gets in our way.
Yeah, because it's like when you mentioned, you said, well, PG&E wasn't the only, they were the cause of the fire. Now, yes, there are other things, but it gets so complex at that level. It is the environmental groups and the lawyers and the lawsuits that prevent real life-saving measures from taking place.
So Matt, your question is what can people do to help Paradise? I think what they can do is take care of their community. Like Woody said, I'll say it in a more politically correct way. They can clean their underbrush. They can make sure they have fire breaks around their homes, and they can have backup communication systems that people were not warned to get out of town. The communication system went down. So people need to really look at their own communities. This will not be the last major fire at a community. We all know that. So people need to take care and minimize the things that help that fire grow. It wasn't just PG&E, although they were the catalyst, but it was the undergrowth, it was the wind, it was climate. We were in a drought for 4 years. So there are things people can do to ensure their community the entire community doesn't go up in flames as ours did.
And Michelle's mentioning climate change, and Xan, that's kind of underpins the film. We see at the very end of it, other natural disasters around the globe that many would argue are related to climate change. How important was that for you to gesture, for you as filmmakers to gesture towards that as a larger issue we need to confront?
Climate change is really important, and it is, a massive underlying reason and driver for so many of these tragedies. The story, though, is really about people's response to people's suffering and people's response. And, that's why we paired that with the scene of the teenagers who are raising money for the Alabama tornado victims, because for them, it wasn't so much, look what climate change has done to all of us. It was, hey, I bet there are teenagers in that town who couldn't go to school for several weeks and didn't know where their friends went, and, are terrified and lost all their family pictures, and maybe their grandma died. Like, it's about empathy and connection and getting back to who we are really as Americans, and having each other's backs. And I think that goes for the whole world. Like, if we all respond to climate change, it's because we're taking care of each other all around the world.
I'm curious for Michelle and Woody. I found myself watching the film again and thinking about then COVID hitting, because you have these high schoolers or seniors who kind of, they lost their school. They were able, through your efforts and others, Michelle, to graduate on the field of their school. But then they get hit the next year with COVID, and that has interrupted a sense of community for people throughout the world. How has it impacted Paradise and life there?
Well, of course it has, but Paradise is a very resilient community, and our youth are very resilient. We have done pretty much what everyone else has done. We've had some classes in class with the 6 feet distancing, the masks. Of course, everything's backing up right now. Did a lot of online learning. Paradise is a very conservative town too. So there was a lot of people who had problems not being able to go to school. but we followed the California mandates and did what we needed to do. We are just really thrilled that we get to hold a graduation this year and bring the kids back to Wraith Field again to graduate, because that's what these kids want. And we were able to hold a prom, and the teenagers, their whole thing is their social existence. They have to be social. So if we don't let them, unfortunately, they find another way, and sometimes it's not safe. So we were trying to find as many safe ways as we could to get teenagers together. But it definitely put a wedge in the rebuilding for a while.
What do you think about both the town now, the state of rebuilding, and to what degree COVID has kind of impacted that or maybe slowed it a bit?
COVID's, me and my friends meet at the hardware store, and we wear our dang masks. We wore some masks, but I mean, we're mountain folks, man, and we don't follow a lot of rules. COVID has really played havoc on the rebuilding. We, unlike the Santa Rosa fires, which were essentially there were only 300 or 400 of those homes that burned, and they were all like $1 million big palatial places. After a year after their fire, they hadn't even completed one home. And I think we were at 45 homes at the end of 1 year, or 60. We were a huge number of homes completed and people moved back in. COVID has thrown a monkey wrench. When I built my home, I was able to build it for $187 a square foot, custom built stick home by a bunch of quality craftsmen. Right now, the cost of building is at over $300 a square foot. A sheet of plywood that when I built my home cost $30, today is $97. It's ludicrous. Everything is just sky high. So that's how COVID has impacted us with the supply chain. That, and socially, I mean, people just want to get together. I mean, I have friends that haven't been able to see their family members and stuff for a year, more than a year. I manage a performing arts center, which is in the film, for a couple of the memorials. And we had the symphony played there last Sunday night. It's the first thing we've had in 14 months. We have lost over $3,000 a month for 14 months.
Wow, huge impact. And we have another viewer question for Woody and Michelle of how did you feel when you were approached by the documentary team so soon after the fire? Did you have any hesitation about being involved?
No, what's it pay? How much does it pay? What do I get paid?
Lots of love.
When I cannot say enough about this team. They have become our lifelong friends. They did not come in like bulldozers. They came in like friends. And when you get Ron Howard's name attached to it, you're thinking, okay, this is going to be quality. They never ever overstepped boundaries, except for the one to go into closed session. And I'd say that would be good, but I would be fired for school board. They became our friends. We had sleepovers, we shared wine, we shared food, we shared tears, we shared laughter. It never really felt like there was a team following us. It just felt like we were all there together.
Yeah, it was great. When I met Xan and Liz and the rest of the team, that don't ever get mentioned, Link and Johnny and everybody, they're just absolutely fabulous people. I told him, I said, look, I heard Ron Howard's making a movie and, I'm older, so he looks like me. And so if he's going to make a movie about our town, I used to be the mayor, he should play me in the movie. So that was my little pitch. Obviously it worked. But I think what really worked for me was, I loved the people. I trusted them. I was glad to have somebody other than just the news media that exploited us. It was just, oh, look at the fire, look at the destruction. And that was really abrasive to all of us, but they weren't about that. And so, I think for me, what did it was just their honestness. They really they became friends, like Michelle said. These are people I love and miss, and we had a bond. And I think they created that with all of the subjects in the film. It was they were real honest about what they did. you know, and I think when I first met Liz and Xan, it was early on, and, you know, I had been on the council. I know what was going on in those closed sessions. I knew about, and I told them the truth from my perspective about what I knew was happening there, because they were just getting fed whatever, you know, this is what, look at this, here's a dog and pony show. And, you know, here's what they're really talking about, and here's what's going on. And here's what's wrong with what they're doing in there. There was some
You
bad-
know, Matt, Joan Didion, a great California writer, wrote this wonderful line in her book about California that said, we choose the places we won't walk away from. And, you know, both Michelle and Woody, they weren't born in Paradise, but, you know, they chose to live their lives there and to help save the town. And just, you know, I'm from New York City. I don't know if you can hear the traffic outside. You know, very, very different place. And by sheer luck, I got to spend a year in Paradise, California. And I know my whole filmmaking team would say the same, is that we will never walk away from Paradise. It will always be in our hearts. As soon as travel is easier, I will be there to visit.
Well, Governor Newsom said on June 15th, all the restrictions are off.
Okay.
So, and you can fly, get off an airplane.
That's right. Well, I want to thank you all for joining us to talk about Rebuilding Paradise. Producer Xan Parker, and of course, Director Ron Howard, congratulations on your film. And also to Woody and to Michelle for your courage in responding to such an immense tragedy and showing that strength of character that is so impressive.
Well, thanks. If anybody wants to move here, you know, we've got some really land deals. There's a few lots everywhere, and our school system has all been newly rebuilt, and it's a wonderful place to raise your kids and come. So there's still some trees left. Come on out.
Thank you so much, Woody, Xan, and Michelle, and Matt, for this profound conversation. And thank you, the audience, for being with us today, for sending your question. And please spread the words about Rebuilding Paradise, and on the invitation of Woody, and go check it out. Maybe a place for all of us to go. Thank you again so much.